Hello, my name's Julian Edgar and I'd like to talk to you today about my book Discovering Engineering That Changed the World. Now, all my life I've been interested in engineering. I'm not an engineer, but I've always loved looking at engineering marvels, seeing around me those things that men and women have created that are still there, still working, and were revolutionary in their day. And a few years ago I decided I really wanted to see them for myself. I wanted to set off together with my wife and son and go and look at all these incredible things. And that's what we did. Over 5 years, for about a month each year, we travelled through the United States, we travelled through the United Kingdom, we travelled through Europe and especially in Germany, looking at these incredible things. It was a fantastic series of journeys, and I think in this book it really brings some of that to you as well as obviously to us. We start off by looking at rockets. Really, if you start looking at the most extraordinary rockets in the world, even though the Chinese invented them, it was in World War II, or just prior to World War II, when the Germans, the Nazi Germans, started developing that fantastic liquid-fueled rocket called the V2. But the V2 wasn't just a technological marvel, it was also socially and morally utterly corrupt. It was designed by scientists and engineers working in one of the most advanced facilities in the world, Peenemünde in Germany, which we went and looked at, and yet it was built in underground tunnels by slaves from concentration camps. And in the book we actually go and look at one of those tunnels. It used to be in what was East Germany after World War II had finished, but now obviously you can go and look at those tunnels. You can also look at the crematorium where so many of those that were slaves were burnt after they died. Awful, awful things. And so you have this incredible juxtaposition of the most extraordinary advanced technology in the world in the V2 rocket, and yet this horrible moral dilemma of what was actually being used, the people being used to create it. I found it incredibly powerful, and that's how the book opens. We then go to North Carolina, to Kill Devil Hills, where the Wright Brothers were the very first to fly. There's a wonderful memorial on what were sand dunes and are now grassed pastures. You can walk around where those first flights first occurred. You can see the distances that they flew for those first 3 flights and that final third one that went so far. There's a recreation there of the hangars, really the first aircraft hangars in the world, think of that, where they re-erected their craft and often repaired it after crashes. We also, in the book, go and see the very first Wright flyer, or the first one that's been retained anyway, in the Museum of Flight in Washington, a fantastic place. Let's change the picture. Let's go across the Atlantic to the United Kingdom. And let's look at 2 transport technologies there. The first is hovercraft. Although the Russians actually did quite a lot of hovercraft development in the 1930s, really Christopher Cockerell, the British inventor, made them come alive in the 1960s. And gee, did the British ever pick it up and run with those ideas. Culminating in the SR-N4, the Saunders Roe N4, the biggest passenger carrying hovercraft ever created. It took cars as well and travelled back and forth across the English Channel. We actually, in the book, go to a hovercraft museum. We can walk around on that hovercraft, looking at the instruments. In fact, I got to sit in the pilot seat, because they did call them pilots. They flew these enormous craft, and they used to go back and forth across the English Channel. Fascinatingly, when you get up into the little control cabin, 3 people used to be in those cabins, a pilot, a co-pilot, and a radar operator. And you might think, why did a hovercraft need a radar operator? But the hovercraft was speeding across the English Channel, these enormous machines, and they were ducking and weaving between the shipping traffic that was also using the channel. They were doing something like 70 miles an hour as they ducked and weaved through all of these terribly slow ships. And I'm told that the radar operator was just glued to the screen giving directions so they could avoid all these ships that were in their path. Just extraordinary machines to look at, extraordinary machines to read about. Another extraordinary machine which was created in Germany, and also there were American and British versions, are airships. And when we think of airships, we think of Hindenburg, we think of disaster. But really, if you look at the history of an airship, that's the wrong way of looking at it. Airships in their time were the safest, most comfortable long distance flying craft available, and by a huge margin. The Zeppelin company in Germany had a scheduled series of trips to South America. You could take an airship from Germany to South America on a scheduled route. And that was at a time when aircraft, fixed-wing aircraft, could only do little hops. There was nothing like it. The luxury, the comfort, a grand piano on one of the airships, vast numbers of bottles of wine, professional cooks. They were really trying to make it very similar to ships, but these were ones that flew through the sky. You could actually balance a pencil on end for hour after hour in those airships. They were so stable and calm. We also look at fast cars. We go and look at some of the fastest cars that were ever made, the land speed record holders. We looked, I think, at something like 8 land speed record holders, going right back to the 1930s and right up to the current land speed record holder. Marvellous machines to look at, marvellous machines to revel in their engineering, in their brilliance, in what they achieved, going faster than any other car on the planet at the times in which they were done. And we go to Peenemünde Beach in Wales, where they used to run those cars in their time on that beach. We walked along that beach, felt that history. It's really quite an extraordinary thing to do. In the book we also go and look at some bridges. Bridges are probably the greatest manifestation of civil engineering that you can go and look at. The Firth of Forth Bridge, when I saw it at dawn, I nearly cried. I was just so overcome by the grandeur of this lit bridge. It was floodlit in the dawn light. Those just wonderful structural aspects to look at. And the tiny trains that are crossing. The trains look like little toys as they cross this enormous bridge. Of course, the bridge had to look strong as well as be strong, because only a decade or so before, the Tay Bridge had collapsed in the night, and in fact the Firth of Forth Bridge was going to be built by the same engineering staff that built that failed bridge, and of course they got pulled away, and the new bridge had to look strong to give the public a lot of confidence. We also go and look at some wonderful bridges in the United States. The Golden Gate Bridge it's a lovely, lovely bridge, so elegant, so beautiful, with those Art Deco touches to the towers. And on a completely different note, we go and look at a tiny suspension bridge in New Mexico. Why is that important? It's because everything that went across that bridge was going towards the creation of the atomic bomb. It's actually the bridge on the road to where the atomic bomb was created. And talking about things like atomic bombs, the Cold War, we also go and look at a whole range of things associated with that. For me, the most dramatic thing, the most exciting thing, the most extraordinary thing was going down into the Titan missile silos. These enormous missile, they had a whole range of them scattered across the American desert, each one with an enormous missile underground, ready to retaliate after a nuclear strike, or preemptively create one perhaps, typically then of course on the Soviet Union. And to go down inside the control bunker, a domed concrete bunker on springs to withstand the attack of incoming missiles, was just an incredible day. And on all of these visits, all of these things that we saw, I was taking photos the whole time, I was writing descriptions, and so in the book there are photos of every one of the things that I've been talking about, as well as a description, as well as a discussion of its context, its historical context, its engineering context. So you can look through the book, looking at the photos and reading the captions. It's been laid out in a way which can be done as a sophisticated coffee table book if you like, or you can dive in much more deeply and look at some of the amazing technologies that are behind each of these things. I loved writing the book. I loved seeing the things that are described in the book, and I'd really encourage you to have a look at it as well. Thank you.